So going back to the beginning, I grew up in a Christian household, born again believing. And growing up, I was, going to Sunday school, taught to memorize the Bible. So I had this foundation. And even though I saw it all around me, I genuinely remember having a connection to Jesus as a small girl. And it's not something I could explain, but I had a desire to tell people about Jesus and share the gospel. And I had these little booklets. They're called Chick Tracts.
Okay.
And they're like little comic books. And then it leads you to the gospel at the end.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And I would hand them out to everyone. Sometimes, they'd come to my parents and they'd be like, oh, your daughter's giving me this, So God was using me at a young age to proclaim his name. And the enemy swooped in as soon as he could to put a stop on that. And how that happened was being exposed to sexuality through staying up late watching Showtime and HBO when my parents didn't know. Yeah. Hearing things that I shouldn't have heard. My parents weren't super strict around the home. There was a lot of horror movies playing. I mean, Chucky traumatized me as a kid. And those things have effects. They open up doors.
Yep.
And parents don't realize how powerful music, TV, the things they say around kids, how it gets your imagination going and your curiosity going.
That's so true. Even adults, like, we're still sensitive and susceptible, but especially children, yes.
Yeah. And something I just thought of, my parents had a whole bookshelf of Christian books. And one of the books was a Christian book about sexuality. But now I had access to that. So even something that is Christian, it's just the enemy will use anything.
Yes. I actually remember hearing you say something like that in your original testimony video about like researching sex anytime that you could. And I was like, oh my gosh, I've never heard anybody say that. And I was also obsessive about that as a little girl because like I heard my parents talk about it. I saw it on 8 Mile, and then my grandparents had all these encyclopedias and I would pull out the S book and I would go to my room and I would read about all of that. And yeah, I was very obsessive about it very young too. And that was definitely a seed that was planted in my life as well.
Wow. So yeah, so you know what I'm talking about. And as soon as my hormones hit, I was around like 12 or 13, I was boy crazy. My number one goal was boys, boys, boys. And the music I was listening to was totally feeding into this. It was Britney Spears, Mariah Carey.
Yep.
And Mariah Carey was the gateway drug into rap music for me.
Okay.
So then I got into all these rappers that were talking about very dirty things like Lil Kim and what have you. So now I'm this 13-year-old girl in a very white town and I take on this whole persona like I'm a thug and a gangster. And my parents are like, what is going on with her?
Yeah, wow.
And it's like I was trying to find my identity.
Yeah.
And Eminem was really big at the time too.
It's funny to hear you say that, like growing up in a Christian household, but yet you still, through the music and the media, took on this persona, because I attribute it to like all my dad dated was strippers. So like I got introduced to, the rap music and the sexiness through them. But even growing up in a Christian household, you can still be influenced by the world like that. Like those seeds can still get planted. And it wasn't your parents' doing.
Yeah. In fact, my mom didn't want me to get Britney Spears' first CD. And, I made a big fit over it and eventually got my way. And I became very rebellious. So throughout from 13 to 14 was one of my worst years as a person, I was a bad girl, like not getting into drugs or alcohol even, but I would sneak out at night. I would meet up with boys in the woods, like dangerous things.
You're giving me the chills. You're like telling my story here.
Yeah, well, we parallel a lot.
We have so many. Yeah, I feel you. That's why I told you the first time I met you. I'm like, I just feel like I know you. Like we're the same in so many ways. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't want to keep interrupting though. I'm just so
No.
excited because I feel like, oh my gosh, I'm not alone. And I know that there's girls out there who are feeling that way too.
Yeah, and it was like I was one of those girls in the Jerry Springer show. Not the Jerry,
Yes.
but like the Maury show, that the troubled teenagers with the
Yeah.
bandana and like
Uh-huh. I totally get that. I loved those shows as a kid too.
me too. But so anyway, I was doing these things. I was getting into shoplifting. I started stealing from people at school. Like just
Mm,
I got high on doing bad things. It gave me a rush.
yeah.
And whenever I got punished or reprimanded, I did not take it seriously. I did not respect any authority.
Mm.
And I just thought I was so tough. Like, I don't know. It was a spirit, really. It was a spirit over me.
Of rebellion.
Yeah,
Yeah.
big time. And then me and my friend, we were both so annoyed with our parents trying to control us. We're like, let's run away. She said, my aunt has a place in Queens, New York. We can go live with her. So I'm like, all right. And the next morning we got caught.
Yeah.
And my parents said to me, they're like, in a week, we're sending you away to Texas because we don't know how to control you. And this is like a rehabilitation for troubled teenagers.
Yeah.
It's Christian based. You'll go to counseling, church, you'll get on medication if you need it.
Yeah.
And I didn't believe them. I'm like, yeah, right, you're sending me away. You know,
Yeah.
1 week later, I was on that plane and kid you not, my eyes were so swollen from crying, I could barely see
Wow.
because they had broken the wild horse at this point.
Yes.
So
Was
this was,
it helpful for you at all?
yes, it was. There was a lot of pros and cons to this place.
Mm.
I'll tell you the pros first. It humbled me. I had time to think about how badly I treated my parents, how good they have been to me, and I just totally disrespected them.
Yeah.
And another good thing is I formed genuine friends. Like I learned how to form genuine connections with people
Mm.
and open my heart up to talk about pain and all these things I was putting on a front before. Now I was totally open to the pain, but almost too open where it began to consume me
Mm.
and I didn't know how to process it. And my only negative feedback of this ministry, even though they're changing lives, they were giving me medication like it was candy. If
Mm.
I said, "Oh, my moods are off, mood stabilizer." "Oh, I feel this way, antidepressant."
Wow, that's surprising too, with it being a Christian organization that they would be doing that.
Yeah. And I don't want to talk down about it because it did change my life. It could have saved my life, honestly.
Yeah.
But the medication had an effect on me, and I began to feel very numb.
Yep.
And I remember seeing some other girls cutting themselves, and I needed to feel something. So I said, maybe I'll try that and just see how it feels. And I loved it. I became very obsessive about it. And this is the first time I felt addiction to something.
Mm.
And I would carry a box cutter knife on me at all times in case I felt anxious or just the need to do that. And
Yeah.
I would hide it. I wasn't doing it for attention. And at one point, it became very demonic. Like I would almost not audibly hear something, but I would feel something coercing me
Mm.
to do it.
Wow.
And I would carve things into myself like I hate love. I carved help into myself.
Mm.
And it was just, it was getting to a point where it was alarming to people who would see it.
Yeah.
And eventually I came home and I continued doing it while I was back in New York now. And a lot of people were saying, like, what's wrong with you? Like, do you need to go to a psych ward or something? And I realized I needed to stop because I didn't want to end up in a psych ward.
Yes. Okay.
So I started smoking weed. And at this point, Everything was cool with my parents. There was no more, rebellion or fighting,
Okay.
but felt so dark inside. I was consumed by this emptiness, and I wasn't suicidal, but I just felt no purpose of life. And I don't remember going to church that much. I was resistant against it.
Yeah.
I still believed in God, but it was like in the way background of my mind. And I started smoking a lot of weed, and this became my new addiction. And this carried on until about, say, 18, 19 years old. Basically, I had to be high all the time. Otherwise, I couldn't process life.
Yeah, so I have a question on that, like, when you're cutting, you started cutting because you were on all this medicine and you wanted to feel something, anything. When you started smoking, was your intention with weed a little bit different? Like, was it still to feel something, or was this now going into, like, numbing feeling anything?
Good question. So I was off most of the meds. I was still on Adderall.
Okay.
And I would smoke weed for both reasons, to feel something and also to numb myself out.
Yeah, that
So
makes
it functioned both ways.
yeah, I get that.
Yeah. So now at this point, I started to explore other drugs, and nothing stuck, thank God. But I was looking for something. I was searching for something more because I realized like this can't be it, you know? And I don't know what compelled me to go to church one day with my parents, but they were going. Maybe I was feeling really low, but I
Mhm.
said, yeah, I'm just going to tag along, not thinking anything of it.
You were 19
And
at this point?
say it
19
again.
you were 19 at this point?
I'm 19 at this point. Yes. And the preacher is speaking on how Satan uses the things of this world to blind us from receiving the ultimate joy, peace, and love that God has to offer us. And when he said that, it's like his words could not get out of my head. And I came home, I'm still thinking about what he said, and I go to light up my homemade gravity bong. And as I'm taking the hit, actually, I'm like, oh my goodness, this is what Satan is using
Mm,
right now to keep me blinded.
wow.
And right then is when the scales fell off my eyes. And I look around my room covered in Pink Floyd, Led Zeppelin, Jimi Hendrix, my idols. And I realize this too is all blinding me.
Wow.
Ugh. And the Holy Spirit came down on me hard in that
Mhm.
moment. And I was repenting, crying out for Jesus. I surrender, take over my life. And I was born again in that moment.